Welcome to Vanderbilt Library's Poetry Room. We're here with Lila Weaver, who's here to talk to us about her book loves. And if you could just explain a little bit to us about how you came to be at Vanderbilt today, please.
Well, I was invited by Lorraine Lopez, who is in the Latino and Latina Studies program here at Vanderbilt. So there was a symposium going on, and so I'm one of the authors that was invited to talk about my work, which the main book that relates to Latino studies that I have written is a memoir. It's a graphic memoir called Dark Room, a memoir in black and white, and I'm the author and the illustrator. And it was published in 2012 by the University of Alabama Press.
Great. Well, we do these interviews periodically with people, and they come from the idea written by Laura Miller, who's a historian, that she says that the first book we fall in love with shapes us every bit as much as the first person we fall in love with. That emotional attachment may also affect the changes we make as adults. If you can share your book loves with us, that would be great. Was there a book that you fell in love with early on? What was the first book you loved?
I could probably answer this different ways, but the book that leaps to mind is a book that I read when I was, I'm going to guess, 8 or 9, and it's called The 100 Dresses by Eleanor Estes, and it's considered a classic. Now, it was probably written in the 1940s. I think it won a major prize in children's literature. So it was already a little dusty by the time I got to it in the 1960s.
What made The 100 Dresses special to you?
Well, it is a beautifully written book. There's that, and it has a strong emotional core to it. The word bullying doesn't come up in it at all, but it is a story really about children and how mean they can be towards someone who is an outsider. And so there is a girl who, her name is Wanda Petrovsky, and that Petrovsky name is very unusual in this whatever unnamed city the action takes place in. And so she is different in that regard, and she also wears the same dress to school every single day. And so that makes her a target, and she becomes a target that way.
Have you reread it? And if you have, how do you feel about it now?
I did reread it probably for the first time after decades, when my daughters, who are grown now, they're in their 30s and late 20s, I have 2 daughters, and we did a lot of reading aloud together, and that was one of the books that leapt out at me on the library shelves, and so we read it together, and I just remember it still had a lot of the same pull to it. And then recently, I reread it because I wrote a children's book, and it was released this year by Candlewick Press, and it's called My Year in the Middle. And I was invited to submit an essay to this prominent book blog called Nerdy Book Club. And people write about their reading life, especially as children. So that is the book that came to mind. And I went and reread it again several times to try to, craft something personal and how it affected me, how as an immigrant kid that never ever came across a Latina character in a children's book at all, not until I was a mature adult did I find one. So Wanda Petrovsky obviously was not a Latina, but she was a foreigner, or at least her parents were, and so there was something there that we had in common. also, it turns out that these 100 dresses that she brags that she has to the other girls, and of course they don't believe her because she wears the same dress every single day. Turns out that they are actually drawings that she has made, and they find out toward the end of the book, so spoiler. But she's a skilled artist. And I was one of the kids that from very early childhood devoted myself to drawing, and I was known. I was in my classes coming up through school. I was always known as the talented artist in my class. So there were several points of commonality that I had.
Thanks. Was there a book that captured your imagination as a reader before college, and why did it?
The book that comes to mind in that regard is Carson McCullers' The Member of the Wedding, which I have not looked at in probably 40-something years, so I don't know how it would hit me now. There may be all kinds of objectionable material, I don't know. But it is a short book, short enough that I, at 10, 11, 12, I'm not sure what age I was when I read it, because it was probably on my sister's bookshelf. And the protagonist is 12 or so, and she lives in a small southern town just like I did, and it has a lot of the cultural touchstones and the physical sensory details of living in a hot, sweltering place that is nevertheless has some type of romance to it. So that was the book that came to mind.
Is there a book that set you on your professional path?
Interestingly enough, because I went back to school in 2004 after being away for a long time, a book that I was used as an assigned book for one of my classes is Birmingham by Anthony Grooms. And it's a novel that is written. Anthony Grooms is an African American, and he writes about a boy who lives in Birmingham, Alabama in the 1960s, and who is a witness to a lot of the things that are going on in the early 60s, right then in 62, 63, when there were a lot of protests and boycotts targeted at merchants because they would not hire black salespeople or cashiers, and they also had separate dressing rooms, and in numerous ways made life difficult for African Americans. So he wrote about that, and he also, there's shifts in time where he writes about himself about the character as an adult serving in Vietnam, and then as a child, as a young boy in Birmingham, and sort of goes back and forth like that. And it's a skillfully crafted novel, and it was one that, because I was studying it, that I did very close reading. I read it through several times, had notes all over, and I think it was a moment when I started sort of peeking under the surface to try to understand how a novelist, a fiction writer, does his work. So it was really instructive and a very worthwhile read.
In your work now, is there a book that has influenced you?
Well, since I wrote a graphic memoir because I found out that such a thing was even possible, when I came across a graphic memoir called Persepolis by an Iranian woman named, and I don't know how to pronounce this, but Marjan Satrapi. And she wrote it in French, and when it was translated to English, and there were book reviews that appeared in the New York Times and other places, that's how I found out about it. And I saw that she had combined her artistic skill to sort of deliver a story with very strong undertones of political oppression and the things that she and her family experienced in Iran during her childhood. So it's a really powerful story that is true, but that it's illustrated in a way that almost looks like a children's book. So it's pretty startling to see that juxtaposition. So she was a great inspiration to me.
Is there a book you share with friends, family, and coworkers?
All kinds of books, but it seems that I love memoir. And lately I have been in several conversations with people where a book that I read, written by a man named Shulam Dean, and he wrote his memoirs called All Who Go There Do Not Return. He was in an ultra-Orthodox Hasidic sect. They had their own enclave, really, in just north of New York City, and I was completely unfamiliar with that very, very exclusive situation there, and sort of the radical nature of their beliefs was all new to me. And so essentially he goes through a deconversion experience that involves some late into the night sneakily listening to the radio, which is a forbidden thing, that sort of thing like that. And he is a fantastic writer. So I have been telling everyone, please read this. It has a very beautiful creative nonfiction with a story that I think everyone needs to find out how other people live, how they think. Even in the U.S., there's a community where people don't even speak English. You know, they are from childhood raised to speak Yiddish and read and write Yiddish. So it was just such a revelation, and I just love that. It's almost like traveling to me. It's like getting to go somewhere. You're traveling through the benefit of someone's mind into a different life.
Is there a book that you've been given that you remember?
Well, my current read was a gift from my son, who every year for my birthday for quite a few years has given me a gift card to a bookstore, which I think he heard me say one time that, oh, I hate it when people give me books because a lot of times it's not to my taste, and I have some books that are sort of lingering on my shelf that, oh, I don't want to discard it because it was a gift. So anyway, so I got this for myself, and it's, right now I'm on book 2 of the Elena Ferrante series, the novels that are written about Naples and this incredibly complicated relationship between the protagonist and her best friend, frenemy, I don't know, whose name happens to be Lila, like mine. So,
well, thank you so much for sharing your book loves with us.
It was my pleasure.